his name. I'm
Well,
sure I'm not.
I think you already did a lot of that. So I'm going to just ask you some general questions that going over what you do.
Okay.
So let me state your name.
My name is James Wead. I go by Jimmy.
Okay.
And I've been a member of this parish for 51 years, since I was 20. I'm 71 now. I'll be 72. But my family were one of the first families here in 1880. As a matter of fact, the first recorded baptism was Edward Clay, one of my cousins, from 1880 when the parish was founded.
Now, who were your parents?
Mary Ellen Barrett and Francis Wead. And my mother was a Barrett. She also was Irish from this parish. My father's family all lived over here, and Daddy was born in this parish.
Okay. And when do you think your dad's family came over?
Came into this parish in the beginning. Their first parish was St. Vincent's, sometimes mistakenly called St. Vincent de Paul, but it's St. Vincent's, and it was the first Catholic church in Houston, down in the Catholic territory. I believe it was on, Bernice, was St. Vincent's Church on Congress Avenue? Yeah, it was down on Congress in that old area. There was a school and a church, and that was before Annunciation.
So you were the archivist for St. Stephen's and...
Not St. Stephen's, St. Joseph. We just recently had a merger with St. Stephen's, which I understand is going to be disbanded or whatever you want to call it. They're going back to their little parish. It should have never happened, but it did. But we welcome them.
So how did you get involved in taking care of the archives?
My father was really good at history, and he loved his family very much. They all lived in this area of the old 6th Ward. And he never threw anything away. And on his deathbed, he gave all of that archival information from this church and what he had in the family archives. And he told me that if I threw one thing away, that he was going to haunt me. And he has.
So this was just an act of love for you?
It is an act of love, yes. I loved all that family. The family seemed like very, very old people. They were probably my age now, but in the eyes of a child, you know, somebody 50 looks ancient.
I'm 50. So
Are you?
52.
Well,
So
you look younger than 50.
So what is the history? How did this parish get started?
Well, actually, Father Hennessy from Annunciation Parish, he was the pastor there, saw a need for education in this area. There was no school in the 6th Ward. And he asked the nuns at Incarnate Word and Blessed Sacrament if they would go over to this area and try to gather the children and do some teaching. So that's what they did. They came over here in an oxen cart from Annunciation, which was probably maybe 2.5 miles from that area at that time. And they would spread a pallet on the ground in front of a little house out here on Houston Avenue. And the children would come, and the nuns would teach them how to read and write and whatever was necessary for life. And then that went on, and there were just, you know, so many people coming into the area needing education that Father realized that they also needed spiritual guidance. So they formed a parish called St. Joseph's. And they bought a little cottage from some people that I don't even know the name. It's possible that we do know it in Sister Agatha's writings. But they bought the house, the nuns bought it through their money and made it into a school and a church. On weekends they had Mass, and then from Monday through Friday they had classes. And it grew so fast that they made plans to build one of those big old clapboard churches. And they did that in about 1882. And the church faced Houston Avenue. And that went on for a number of years until the 1900 storm struck September the 8th of 1900. And it destroyed the church, but it did not destroy the building next door to it, which was the school. But the church was a real mess. It just flattened it out completely. And did you have some questions about after that?
Yes, I was going to ask.
Well, Father immediately set plans to build a stronger church. So brick was what he was planning on using. Father Banfield was the pastor of the parish for 42 years. He was a fairly new pastor at that time when the storm hit, but he immediately set plans to build this one. But he didn't want it on Houston Avenue. He said that the noises from the street were too much for the services. So he put it on Kane Street, turned it around from where it was before. But the church was built in they started in 1900, and it was built by an understudy of Nicholas Clayton. That's why the church looks so much like Galveston architecture, because the man's name was Patrick Rabbit, and Nicholas Clayton had so much work to do in Houston with an Incarnate Word rebuilding, and so he assigned Patrick Rabbit to build this church, and he did so, did a beautiful job too.
So what does this neighborhood look like now as opposed to what it might have looked like when the church was young?
Well, it was a big neighborhood. There were big homes in this whole area, and as a matter of fact, my family lived in every house along Decatur Street, which is now where Knapp Parts Department is. The Clays and the Weads and the Cliftons, they were all kin, and they all lived on that same street. So
it was very residential.
Very residential. And at that time, I think that the old German men wanted their families under their thumb. So he gave them all property to keep them around him. They called it Clay's Compound. And then they also owned a dry goods store and a grocery store on those corners. They owned all four corners of Houston and Washington Avenue, and it was at one time known as Clay's Corners. And that went on until around 1937 when, I'm digressing. You were asking me about the church, and now I'm going into my family.
The community, so you're right on
Okay.
You're right on that.
But anyway, they sold off to Knapp Chevrolet, and Knapp has done a masterful job of their department. That whole corner there is very nice. They keep it well maintained. But anyway, the parish became mine when I turned 20 years old and moved away from home. So at that time, my daddy always wanted to come over here. He always came to St. Joseph's altar, and he wanted to come to Mass here, and although we were in Immaculate Conception Parish. So as time moved on and Daddy got sick, he told me that he would haunt me if I threw one piece of paper away. Of course, I hope he didn't mind, but he would save an entire newspaper for an obituary that was that big. But I did clean some of that up. But anyway, and I became very excited to be over here in this parish. Father Sullivan, when I was a young boy, Father Sullivan was the parish priest here. He was a very nice man. And then I started acquiring different little things from all that family. That's why I've got the things here today that I do, because they seem to trust me with the belongings of the family.
So this is your vocation.
So this is kind of, yes, that's a good way to put it. But I'm so happy that Teresa called for us to come here, because these things will be forgotten. We're the storytellers, and there is a letter on the front of one of those books. I want you to read it. And I think maybe Bernice knows it, but I want her to read it also, about the storytellers. We are those chosen ones that tell the stories. We're the ones that stood in front of those graves and wept, knowing that that was our blood, that those were our bones and our blood in those graves. But anyway, back to St. Joseph's. The school was a very big what am I trying to say? They had large classes, and some of the people were less fortunate, so the nuns were, giving them credit for education, and it didn't work, so we lost out on the school. And I think it was around maybe 62 or 64 that the school went down. The nuns came back to our aid and started teaching here again, but we lost out and no more school.
So you were mentioning at first that there was a lot of German families that moved into the area. What other types of groups were living in the area, and how has it changed over the years?
Well, there were many different groups of ethnic background. I think probably the percentage of Germans was very high when this parish began, and then after that the Italians followed, and then the Irish. And I think the parish thrived because of its location with the Southern Pacific Railroad. Railroad was the only way. There were no planes. Well, there were planes, but they weren't made for transporting people around. It was more for military use. But that's why I think that this parish survived those years, because of the train travel and people getting off the train. They always went to a church because they knew that there would be someone there that would comfort them and help them and direct them. And that's what I think happened here, that we had great people that lived in this parish that were willing to give of themselves.
So you've been here in this parish for 50 years. Who are some of those people that are most memorable to you?
Miss Hyman, Mrs. Frances Hyman, and her husband's name was also Francis. They were amongst those first registered in the parish. And their daughter, Diane, is also my friend to this day. She's still a member of this parish. Diane is probably about 60 years old, but she's still a parishioner. And the Clays, Henry Clay was one of my cousins. They were parish parishioners for many, many years. And so many of them are gone. I mean, when you live to be a certain age, you say goodbye to a lot of people, especially family. My family were very old. They came here in 1852, and then the ones that I knew were dying at 75, and I'm 72, and I thought they were ancient. So I have that to look forward to, I guess. Anyway, it's just been a loving parish all these years. It's been something that is in my heart and will always be there.
What is your best memory of growing up in this area and in this church?
Well, probably with my aunt. She was we call them old maids, and she taught me how to spell spinster. That she told me that she was a spinster. So I loved being at her house. It was at 811 Colorado. Trinity and Bismarck runs into Colorado, and that was where her little house was. And she used to make the vestments for the priest here. And one day I went into that little house, and she had vestments that she had been embroidering with gold thread for the priest. I think some of those still exist here. But those were real happy times with her. She was a funny little lady, and she was unmarried.
I think that it's interesting that they named the street after Bismarck. So talking about the German.
Oh, yes. I was trying to think of some of those old German names. Bernice knows all of them. And there was also a man that did a lot of photography work. Bernice, you probably know who he is. Schlitz or Schuler. He was a big photographer here. I've got many photographs in those books that he took. He was would go around with a horse and cart and had one of those big wooden cameras, and that's the way they used to
open them up.
Yeah. Well, it was the lens had to be self. You had to hold the shutter. It was not an automatic shutter. Anyway, some of those pictures are taken by him.
So in all of your memories that you have kept in the archives, what is your favorite item?
My favorite item is when they installed the altar in 1909. The main altar in that church came from my family, and their friend built the altar. It was the Ott Memorial Company in Galveston. They were big, and Bernice probably knows them too. But they built that altar. And a lot of the marble is from Italy, from Carrara, Italy, and some of it is from Arkansas. Isn't that strange? Arkansas marble. But I have all the information on that altar, and I thought that was a very wonderful thing for them to do. My great-grandfather said instead of a big memorial in the cemetery, he would rather the church have an altar. And so that's what they did. The altar cost $5,000 in 1909, which would have bought a whole row of houses. But that's one of my, it's a prize. It's one of my prizes. I still love that altar so much. A lot of it's been dismantled. It went all the way to the top with a big cross on it. And they took that all apart, and a lot of the pieces are missing off of it, but most of it's there. It's still very beautiful. It's a work of art. But the Ott Memorial Company, the Otts were their friends. All those Germans stuck together. They were just like anybody, very clannish. And the parish is where all of my family found each other. All of their mates. The Dailies lived across the street. If you walked out of this front door of the church, you'd walk right into their living room. And he was a singer, and Bessie Daly played the organ here. And she said that they had a water-pumped organ, And when it would freeze, they had no heating. There was no heating in that church. And she said that the pipe, in order for them to melt the ice in the pipe to pump the organ, they had to run their hands up and down the pipe inside the church so that when the service started, they'd be able to play the organ. I never heard of have you ever heard of a water pumped organ? Well, that's what they said that it was. And that's what Miss Hyman told me, and that's what my Aunt Bessie told me. So she said that they would just rub their hands on that thing until the ice broke and melted down into the thing so that the water pressure would pump the organ.
It sounds like for you, the church is more than just a building or a place to come.
Oh,
it is family.
Yes, it is. And it's the home of the Blessed Sacrament. You know, when you take the Blessed Sacrament out of there, it's just 4 walls and some furniture.
Well, I'm going to wrap things up there.
Well, I want to do this again, and
I think this is a good start.
I hope that you all. I wish you all the very best. And Teresa, you won't be sleeping much at night, finding all that stuff to do. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.